you read somebody else's book and you're like, oh, if they got published, so can I. You'd be that arrogant person.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have never had that thought ever.
No, never.
Hi there, Edibuddies, and welcome back to the Edibuddies podcast. I'm Kara. I'm a fiction editor, and on this show, we talk about writing, editing, and the friends you can make along the way. My guest this month is a very close friend of mine, Jessica Disciacca. Jess and I have known each other since we were kids, and one of the things that we bonded over was a love of fantasy and games and storytelling. A few years ago, Jess wrote a novel, and she asked me to read it and later to officially edit it. If not for that, this show and probably my whole career wouldn't exist. That novel is not yet published. Like many authors out there, Jess has yet to publish any of her work. And as you'll hear, she's got a lot going on, but she keeps writing and editing and hoping anyway, which I think a lot of you can identify with, and is also really what makes a writer. You just keep going.
So my name is Jessica Disciacca. I'm right now stationed in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm a proud mother of two. For my day job, I guess, not my superhero job, I am a middle school teacher. So I'm certified to teach K through 12 art, K through 5 elementary, and then high school English and history. So I just finished up my master's and I'm planning on going for my doctorate here in the next 3 years to get that under my belt. And English, as far as my degrees wise go, I'm have my bachelor's in fine arts, bachelor's in K through 12 education, communications, business, and English. So English was definitely in there for a while.
So wait, how many degrees do you have?
So just undergrad, like bachelor's degree, I have fine art from the Art Institute. And then from Park University, I didn't know what I was going to do at this point. So I had a lot of credits. So I had a bachelor's in K through 12 education to pair with my fine arts. And then I also ended up getting one in communications, business, and English because a lot of the classes overlapped. And if I timed it just right, I could like graduate one semester with a couple degrees and the next semester with another bachelor's degrees because it all rolled into each other.
So you essentially were able to collect multiple degrees by like stacking which like courses overlapped.
Right. And like I couldn't like graduate with one too soon because then it would push me into a master's program. So it like all had to be within a year. So I had to make sure like, okay, this class, it was like a puzzle. Yeah. So like this class overlap with this class. But if I take it here, then I'm graduating 5 months here with this one. So yeah, it was kind of a staggered and release project. But yeah, I just graduated from Northwest with my master's in educational leadership and superintendent.
My God. Okay. So I didn't realize it. I didn't even realize it was that complicated.
Yes, it
So
is.
why did you decide I need to get all of these degrees? Like you just saw the opportunity and you were like, I might as well.
Yeah, so I originally went into school with a bunch of scholarships for law. So I was going to be a like a child advocate lawyer or a protective lawyer. So I really wanted to defend them just based off of my history and my love for children. And then quickly in like that first year, and I realized, wow, I'm not gonna be able to start my career until I'm 35. I'm not gonna be in a good place. Like all these things in a family was huge to me, and I didn't want to wait that long to have a family and to really be able to invest it. And I wanted to go to their parties at school and things like that. So I ended up backing off there for a while. I got a job at Commerce Bank. And then I was like, oh, I could do business. This is like easy money. I can work my way up really fast here. And then I realized I went and did a couple semesters there and I hated, accounting and all that. So yeah, I kind of switched focus. Communications, English, those degrees pay very close with each other as far as credit wise goes. And I already had a lot of that under my belt. And then, yeah, I kind of took a hiatus from school, was like, what the hell do I love? And it became art, kind of took me back to my childhood. And I was like, okay, now with this, how am I going to make money? So that's where like the rest of them kind of came into play.
Gotcha. Okay. So I see, I can kind of see how there was like a snowball effect that happened.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So then how did you end up with writing? I mean, it seems like you had a lot of different interests. You had you're like, okay, I love art, and then I'm going to teach art so that I can make money out of art, which I love. But then you have this other expression of art through writing that you also love, and also reading. I know you're a huge reader. So where did that piece come into all of it?
I didn't fall in love with reading until I was in fourth grade. I actually hated it before then. And my parents came on like end of September, beginning of October to my parent teacher conference, and my school had this book thing going on where you read like 80 books by October, and you get to go meet all these authors in Warrensburg College. You get to go visit a college. It was a really big festival going on. And so it was September, and my parents come in, and they didn't know about it because I didn't tell them because I hated reading. And so then what did my parents proceed to do? They were divorced at the time. So this happened at both houses. There was no safe haven. They shoved books in my face. I went to the library every other day, and I basically read those 80 books within a month.
Whoa.
At a fourth grade read level. So that's literally all I did. It was like my dark ages, but in reality, it was my renaissance, because I fell in love with reading and I just couldn't stop afterwards. My parents really never let me watch a whole lot of TV, but when I did watch TV, I was always interested in like Dawn and all these other like sci-fi fantasy shows. I love Star Trek. Star Wars has always been, that's my callus. Like that's my foundation for everything of Star Wars. Just love the world building and how you could easily escape and become anything in that type of world. And I also love the fact that it had no limitations. Like, as long as you had some rationale to explain it, even though it may have not made sense to most people, but it made sense to you and you could follow it, it became sci-fi fantasy. And went throughout my years, I always like had on my checklist to write a book. That's kind of been on my bucket list. And I wrote a lot in high school. Twilight was my inspiration in high school. I'm ashamed to admit.
But there's nothing to be ashamed of, first of all, because
Yeah, it wasn't on the premise of Twilight, but it had vampires in it because that was like the thing back in the early 2000s. You
oh
know what I mean?
God, yes.
Yeah, it was like between Buffy and True Bloods, and then the Twilight series. And of course, Anne Rice had always been Anne Rice. I grew up with her. My mom and my dad both loved her. So they own every book. Every time her books came out, they were in line waiting for them. And I snuck them and read them, even though they're highly inappropriate for children under the age of 16. But moving on.
And also, those books, I feel like if you grew up reading Anne Rice, it's kind of like, oh, I know everything about you,
Yeah.
because they're written in such a specific way and they appeal to such a specific kind of person, with that flair for,
Yes.
like you said, the world building, but also the darkness and the dramaticism and all of that stuff. I see so much of that in you and in your writing as well. And I see that influence.
I feel like it comes out like everywhere. It's kind of like that obsession with and I was raised in a religious household, so it was always the obsession of the opposite. Like, what is there? And my mom's side is from New Orleans, from the French Quarter, and so just all that things in here, my nanny stories, and how it was, and then listening to Anne Rice's, and then learning about it in history with all the historical landmarks and events that happened there. It just kind of became an obsession. I've always kind of leaned my interest towards more of the darker things that scare me, and I step a foot, I maybe take a footstep too far into that dark pool, you know what I mean, but I'm able to get myself out real fast. So yeah, it's always kind of been an obsession. And then so like I was saying, I wrote in high school. One of my best friends used to sit in Spanish class and read everything for me, and then I kind of faded off in college, and then followed my degree in teaching, became a mom of two, and ended up staying home with them. And during COVID, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a book. So yeah, so I wrote my first book series. I think I'm like 3 books in on that one, and it needs to be completely chopped and re-edited. You kind of got through that first one.
Okay, so let's slow down here, first of all, because
Sure.
because I remember you telling me when you wrote your first book, and you're like, I've written a first book. How many words was it?
So I think it was before the first edit. Like, this was the first edit. I think I was at like 305,000 words.
That's what I had. I had 310 written down because that's what I remembered.
Yes. So somewhere around that.
You know how insane that is.
Yes. Well, now, especially because here's the thing, like I dove in, I was like, I'm not gonna like get this published. This is just for me. Right. So I had no rules. And then I started writing it, and I'm like, I could do this here, and I'm reading all these things, and, you read somebody else's book and you're like, oh, if they got published, so can I. You'd be that arrogant person. Doesn't work out like that.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have never had that thought ever.
No, never. Right. But yeah, and so then I started really getting into it, and like I cut, and I remember that first cut I ever did, because like when you're an author, you read your book like, God, I think I'm up to 19 times at this point, and I even haven't read the most recent edits you did last year before my life got crazy with school and stuff. But yeah, so like you read it over again. That first edit, I think I got it down to like 235. And I was so proud of myself. And I was like, that's it. I got this. I'm done. And then like I look it up and they're like, first time authors should be no more than in this genre, 85,000 words. And I'm like, what? I just felt sick, right? Like I was sick because I was always already in like book 3 of this series and like so invested. And like I dreamt about these people and were these people, and so then I was like, you know what? We just need to cut our losses here. So I kind of started doing some research. I actually read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Love Akhtar and all that and all those acronyms. She's like definitely my favorite author at this point. Definitely one of them. And yeah, I read hers, kind of fell in love with that. And I've always, we have like Thor and all of those Nordic god movies going on to where they're relevant right now. And I was like, well, let me do the research because I always know all these folklores have a dark side to them. And we always see these pretty sides, like, sparkling vampires type of situation. And it's really never the case with these fairy tales and folklores. Like they're very morbid and crazy. So I went down the research rabbit hole. I have like a whole yellow legal pad just full of notes about mythical creatures like fairies and woodland creatures and just like water spirits and things like that, and how they're all just morbid. They're very cynical, they're very anti-Christ, they're very like all these things, but these myths have been here even before the Catholic Church arose. So yeah, I became obsessed with that, and I was like, I'm going to write it the way it's supposed to be written, and of course I romanticize the main characters and their evilish deeds, but for the most part all of the other people that they interact with in the world, they're very hunger driven, sex driven, power driven. Like that's what all these characters are. So you really see that. And that's where I think I push my genre that I'm kind of targeting towards into that dark fantasy. That's because it's a little bit more brutal at times. And you see the realization of what these people grew up with, not what Disney and all Marvel and all these other things I've created.
Yeah, you don't get the sanitized like children's folktale version. You get like when these people were gods, This is
Right.
the kind of stuff that they were people with the tales what the people were telling. So I'm curious. I mean, you are such a prolific writer. You just get these ideas and they just pour out of you. That's just like, which there's, a lot of people who will listen to this who will be cursing you for that. But it's always one or the other. It's always either you have too much and you don't know how to cut it down, or you have too little and you don't know how to get it out, right? Every writer has a different
Yeah.
struggle. What does writing, like the process of sitting down and writing and getting the characters on the page, like what does that do for you? What drives you to do that?
So I have a wild imagination, and I honestly sometimes it scares me because I use my imagination for anything in life. So like when I get depressed or I'm not happy, I kind of go into my mind and I can disappear. And I think as a child that probably was a coping mechanism, and I think that's also why I maybe am drawn so much to the sci-fi fantasy world, because those were the things that I fell in love with and could escape in when I was little. And
Sure.
so like these characters, like when I started my first book series, I had actually had a dream that connected a couple of plots. And so I kind of sat down and started being like, okay, what can I do? Where can I go? But then my second book, which is really the love of my life, I shall say, because I feel like I'm so invested, and I'm definitely gonna, by the time I die, I'm gonna do something with this book, right? Somebody else is going to see it outside of the two of us and my sister. But yeah, that book, I sat down and I'm like, okay, names. People automatically are attached to names. So I'm sitting down and I'm like, okay, I start doodling off some names that I like, some very fictional names. I was raised with Jessica. I graduated high school with 19 Jessicas. My name is boring. We want something mythical and, exotic. So
Yeah.
yeah, I sat down with those names and I started making charts of families of who was what. And I kind of started plotting from there. And I knew the focus of what I wanted to go with. And I wanted to go with the darker version of the more elven type of world, with different realm building and things like that. And I knew I wanted to go there. And then I don't know, I just sat down and I just start writing, right? And I'm like, I know the characters of the main plot. Now, what is, or I know the qualities, I should say, the characteristics of the main character, right? But what is going to make her different? And I didn't want to do something so similar, like, oh, her parents died, she's an orphan, blah, blah. Even though mine is technically an orphan. Uh, and things like that for a while. We'll get to that point later.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't give
Yeah,
too
yeah.
much away. I always want to make them like a female. I kind of pour myself into that person because I feel like, as a book, you don't really catch on to those characters unless you can see yourself in that character that you're following along with and hitched on for the ride. So I started pouring a lot of qualities of myself, of things that I was insecure about. And, in the very beginning, definitely she's a lot of like a big reflection of myself and who I was at that point. Always a protector, never protected. type of situation, always fighting for, survival and things like that. And then eventually I develop her in a way, I incorporate some of my own traumas into my life, from my life into her own. And then I build her up in the way that I want to eventually become. And so from there, yeah, this world just started. This book, I think I wrote in just under a week. I literally slept maybe 3 hours a day. Like I could not stop writing. And I could just it was just pouring out of me. And the thing was like, I could not sleep because once the story got started and all these characters came into play, I loved them so much. Like I didn't want to miss a beat with them. So I just kept, I was like, oh, I'm going to forget this. I have to keep going. And so I literally pushed myself, I think for 6 days, and it was during, COVID. And there was one little coffee shop in Liberty open, and I sat down, hammer hand. So call out. But yeah, I sat down there until they closed. One time the owner shut the lights off and I was still in the back with my headphones in, and I could not stop. And then from there, the basic story is born, and then you have to go back and add it, edit a couple of things. I remember one of the main characters of the book that he was never on paper. He was supposed to be killed off and be done. He was never supposed to have a reoccurring, part. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I need something extra to really turn this plot around, because every book is supposed to have a miniature plot inside of a larger plot. And I was like, oh, he can be it. Here we go. And this is how we can incorporate. And then I fell in love with his character. Now he's one of my favorites. So, it's just.
And that's the whole, that is the process of creation, right? Is the unexpected things that can happen when you look back at what came out of you and be like, oh, I can speak this, or I can do that. Like, that's what I love about the editing process, is being able to take what you started with and then, grow from there. So when you wrote the book in a week, how long has the editing process taken you?
Right. So I think the first time around, I edited a couple times, 2 or 3, just for punctuation, validity, consistency, things like that. And then I had someone else listen to it while I read it to them, because I think reading out loud is very important. You need to see how conversation flows on paper, how stupid it sounds if you say it out loud, because God forbid you're in front of people and you have to do a book reading, things of that nature.
Right.
And then from there, I think you read it once. You were another person that read it once, just for validity's sake. And I knew you were going to be really, cutthroat with me and brutal, because, I was like, I told you to. But also, you're like, if this isn't good, I'm going to tell you. So I can trust you in that retrospect, to be very honest. And then after that, my life kind of got in the way. And so I've been back into that survival mode, kind of like my main character. And then I ended up deciding to go back to school this past year. So that was, I think I wrote that book in April of 2021. And then my life started getting crazy probably October of 2021. So I had to take a step back and just focus on that. But when you started up your business, you asked me if one of my books could be your first run through. And so I was like, heck yes. So yeah, we just went through, and it's another editing process to go through now. So,
I mean, I basically begged you, because I was just realizing that that's what I wanted to do. I had read your book, but I had really only looked at it. When I read your book for the first time, I wasn't trying to be an editor. I was essentially being like a beta reader for you. And it was like a whole year, a year and a half later, when I was starting my business, and I was like, all right, please let me edit your book.
Yeah, you didn't have to beg that hard.
Just please let me. And it was such a good experience for me, because it just gave me a lot of confidence. I knew I was a good editor. I knew I was good at reading and giving comments and giving brutal feedback. But
right.
but taking on something like a novel is a whole other thing. And it was was it 65,000, 75? How many words was it?
No, mine's right about, it was probably at 87 at that point,
80,
I think.
85. Yeah. Okay.
I've edited it down to about 83 right now, but yeah,
yeah. So it was a daunting task, but I felt really lucky to be able to, take that on, and knowing that you would also give me good feedback and everything. So to that end, what was it like? Well, first of all, just what was it like being edited? Like having someone else actually come in and edit for you? What was it? What about it did you expect, and what was not expected for you?
So I will go with what I was not expecting. So honestly, I was not expecting, and this may be just the fact that you had already gone through once, but I was expecting a lot more edits, corrections. And when
Hmm.
you were like really honest and you were like, no, it reads like a novel. Like it reads like I just picked it up off Barnes and Noble bookshelf. I was like, oh, okay. Like, so like that gave me like the confidence. And I loved the fact, something that I did love, just with your editing process and what you did, is you not only pointed out what I needed to correct or suggestions you thought would make this, story flow better. You also were like, hey, that was so like, I did not see that coming. That was a great part. And so that was like, going through there, I'm like, okay, edit, 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 edit. Oh, compliment. Whoa,
Uh-huh.
And I think that's just like really important because, when you give your baby essentially, because like, like I don't know how you can love a pack of papers, but I do. Like I love my file on my computer. It's literally an emotion. Like it's like one of my children,
Yeah.
and I don't know. So like when you love something like that and you put so much work into it and you love these characters and it comes, out of you because it's so personal, to give that and hand that over to somebody else, you have to be very vulnerable and be like, okay, I'm choosing this person because I trust them. But I have to understand that they may come back and tell me they don't like this part. And this is my favorite. So we got to like figure out why. Is there a way that I can? And there was a couple of spots where a particular relationship, at the very beginning of the book, you were like, I'm just not feeling it. What else can you give in order to really make me feel it? Because this character doesn't reappear until the end of the book next time. So like what, you know what I mean? And it was one of those situations where I had to be really vulnerable with myself and like take that edit, not as an offense. Like you're not doing that to hurt me or be like, your book's crap, or anything like that. You're doing that to make me better. And as an objective standpoint, you're saying, I'm not feeling it here. Let me see why. And let's see if we can connect these dots.
Yeah. I love that you say that because that's exactly what my philosophy is as an editor, is like I totally understand it's your baby. And me knowing you so well and reading that character, I knew it was you. Like I could see, like the survivor and the protector and like I could see all those traits of you coming out in this character. And it's like there's no way I can like tear this
Yeah.
through all the threads. Not that I like, and not that I needed to, because you're not a terrible writer or anything like that. But even if you were, like, when you are really getting authentic, generally, like the writing is good. It's most of writing for somebody like you,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like is stripping away the inauthentic stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
stripping away the pieces that you think need to be there in order to like dress up the writing or to like dress up the story. And it's like, no, not so much. Like you can let some of the things that you think you're supposed to be doing go and just really be yourself on the page and let that vulnerability out. And that's usually when it's best. Do you think that it was beneficial to have an editor who you were kind of close to, or do you think it would be better to maybe have somebody who doesn't know you as well?
I mean, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is that it doesn't matter, right? Like, I think it just matters the quality of that editor,
Hmm.
right? And so, like, why I even asked you originally to edit my book wasn't because like we were best friends. It wasn't that reason, it was because like I did know you, and I knew your background. Like, you love sci-fi fantasy just as much, if not more, as I do. You're very rehearsed in it. You read it a lot. And so, I picked you based off of my content and the fact that like I know you're brutally honest and you're very intellectual, to where like you were gonna catch things that maybe some people wouldn't. You were gonna, you want, like, you question every sci-fi fantasy movie I think we've ever seen together. And we have a whole like 2 hour after dinner coffee talk about it. You know what I mean? And you're like, well, this
Yeah.
didn't make sense. And so you catch all those little things. And like I said, validity is very important to me. And so
Mm.
that was why I chose you. I guess it helped the fact that I did know you because I know all these things about you. But I
Right, for
mean,
sure.
like as an editor, you want somebody who is passionate and loves your content, along with the fact that they are a good editor, they have the skills to do so, and they're going to be honest with you. They're not just doing it for a paycheck. Like they're invested in, the product that they're kind of pushing out and putting their stamp of approval on.
Yeah, and I like that you say that because I do think that is the biggest thing about hiring an editor for yourself versus like, if you go through the traditional publishing process, the editor is the editor, like you don't really get so much a choice in that process. But when you hire an editor for yourself because you're really looking to improve your writing or because you're really trying to put something out there, you get to kind of make that choice and make sure that you're getting somebody who's going to give you the style of editing that you really want. So let me ask you this. Besides publishing, like you're not yet published, you would like to be traditionally published at some point, is that correct?
Yes, except we met that author when we went to the Fae Ball this year for Comic Con, and I can't remember her name.
Lexi Ryan.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I had just gotten done. Like I knew I was going to meet her. So I went ahead and like slammed a bunch of her books. I slam books better than I do shots, but anyways, besides the way. A little salt to this conversation. Anyways, so like I slammed her books back and when I asked her, like, what, any advice? She told me, she goes, don't focus so much on traditional publishing. She goes,
Mm,
I have made more money off of self-published books. Like a couple of, I guess she had told me and shared with me a couple of publishing houses came after her and they could not match what she was making off of these.
wow.
I mean, because there's so many like less avenues and streams that you have to have your paycheck cut out to, like a publishing
Mm,
house versus like self-published. You can fill all those voids together so you get that paycheck. So yeah, so it honestly, like hearing her say that, and like I loved her books and like seeing how wide of genres she writes, like she's a
hmm.
little bit different in each one, made me really like, excited to like get to know about self-publishing anymore. So like, I'm gonna go ahead and get my query letter together and push some scripts out and things like that. But if that's while that's cooking and waiting for those rejection emails, I'm going to go ahead and work on self-publishing, because that, with all our technology, that's really the way things are going.
Besides that process of like, obviously you want to get your writing in front of other people's eyeballs and find readers, that's what we all want. But what else, like, what other goal do you have for your writing? Like, what kind of experience do you like want your readers to have? And what do you really consider like success for yourself as a writer?
Yeah, I think honestly, like the reason why I'm trying to become, I should say, and I love writing, is the fact that like I love it when you get done with like a good book and you either feel like you lost your whole family because you got to go back and reread it again because they're gone, right? The story has ended, or two, you were just like so breathtaking, like with the story and the way that the writer writes, that you're just like, wow, like you're left speechless. And I mean, I don't know, I am a book nerd, so that may be a book nerd speaking, because like people do that with movies. But yeah, that's what I do. Like that's how I know, like, and I want other people to experience that feeling, and I want to be able to give them that, because I feel like I love writing, I love what I do, I love my stories. I just want, when you love something like a new recipe or a new bar down the street, you want to share it with other people. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of like same thing I want to do with my readers. I want them to take away just an awing experience. And I also, I'm a teacher. I want the kids to get back into books. I want
Mm,
the screens are not doing anything for them. Like I see it firsthand, you know what I mean? And so like books are where it's at. Books are where people question things and get ideas and have time to go back and edit and rethink and compare. And you hear a voice, I think, that you don't hear really a whole lot anymore through Hollywood or through TikTok or things like that. You really just hear this voice of the writer, and I think that people are naturally blessed with that gift in order to have their heads filled with nonsense stories in order to share with others.
I love that. So I really wanted to have you on here because, well, partially because we're friends. I mean, there's a million reasons why I want to have you on here. But I also love that, you can hear a ton of podcasts out there with, published authors, self-published authors, um, but there's so many out there like you who are writers. You absolutely are. You are one of the most prolific writers I know. Most people cannot bang out a book in a week. Like the amount that you are able to write is insane. But like, yeah, you're not published. Like nobody's ever read your stories besides your, two or three people that you've shared them with. And I think that like that's most writers, right? Most people have those stories in them and they're like desperate to get them out there. So I'm just kind of curious, like as somebody who's just, in that grind, you have your kids, you have your other job, you have your whole life, and then you have this passion, do you have any words of advice or encouragement for other people out there like you that are just on the grind trying to get their stories out?
Yeah. For me, like I used it a lot as like my self-healing time, I guess, and like my me time. I don't know. And I don't, I can't speak for a lot of writers because I know a lot of people write for different reasons, right? The reason that why I wrote was because I loved the story and I got to tell the story, and even if I don't like ever get it published, nobody else reads it after this, things like that. Um, I love going back and reading it. Like it's my own good book. Like I read I read A Court of Thorns and Roses at least once a year. It's like my go-to, or the Harry Potters. We all watch them in November. You know what I mean? Like that's that time. And like for this book, like you got to be able to love it and do it for yourself. Basically, I guess that's the advice I would do it, because if not, people are going to see straight through you. And you got a real chance here to make a difference in somebody's life. Just by giving them something that they can love and hold on to. And so like, don't waste it on gibberish. Like really invest your time and love it, because people are going to be able to tell.
Jess's book isn't out yet, but when it is, I will let you know. In the meantime, if you have a pack of papers that you have fallen desperately in love with, check out my editing services at midwrite.com or reach out to me on Instagram at midwriteworlds. Next month, I'm chatting with someone who represents an emerging part of the book publishing industry that I'm not quite sure anybody really knows what to do with. I'm going to be speaking with Ashley Hazelwood, a book talker and bookstagrammer who has a lot of experience in the social media sphere. I can't wait for that. I know you're going to love it. Until then, have a great month.